Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar 2022 Caching Explained. My name is Kerry, and I'm the community manager of SiteGround. I have the privilege to introduce our speaker today, Cal Evans, whom I'm sure most of you already know. For the rest, Cal is a PHP developer, book author, and blogger with years of experience, and he's here to tell us today what is caching, why it is important to use it, and how to improve your website performance. But before I give him the mic, a few details about the webinar. A recording of this webinar will be uploaded tomorrow on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe by clicking the button on your left. The whole presentation will last approximately 40-45 minutes, and at the end there will be a Q&A session. So make sure to post your questions in the section Ask a Question on the left. At the end, Cal will review them and answer as many questions as possible within the webinar timeframe. Okay, we're done with the boring part. Now I'm leaving the stage to Cal and wish you a productive webinar.
Greetings, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful day. I know I am because I get to talk to you all of y'all. Before I get started, big shout out to all my homies here in the great state of Florida, here in the U.S. I keep seeing people saying I'm from this part of Florida. I am broadcasting live from my secret lair here in South Florida. So if it's coming to you faster than it's coming to everybody else, it's because we're closer. Anyhow, hey, standard disclaimer. I have now minimized the chat and it's behind a window, so I can't see the chat. It's great saying hi to everybody, but if I leave that open, then I'll start reading that and I won't be paying attention to actually the presentation. So if you've got questions that you want answered, please use the Ask a Question feature because the chat just scrolls off and I never see that. For those of you who don't get here early, we have great conversations, mostly consisting of me saying hi to everybody. But every now and then we have some great conversations that happen early. So if you see one of these SiteGround webinars going on and you see it's me doing it, show up a little early and let's chit chat about stuff. I was talking with somebody about Costa Rica and scuba diving just earlier this morning. So okay, so let's talk about caching. Caching can be used for big sites. It used to be something that only big sites had to worry about. If you were running your own little blog, you never bothered about it. But these days, caching serves two really important purposes. First of all, it makes your website faster, and that's the one everybody focuses on, okay? But second of all, and just as importantly, you can serve the same number of users with fewer resources because caching takes the expensive part and stores it so that the next person that comes along, we don't have to redo all of that. And we'll talk about what all of that is. And that means that you get to squeeze more out of your existing server. You can serve more users, you can sell more products, whatever your website does, without having to use more resources, more power, anything like that. So let's talk a little bit about what is caching and, most importantly, what you can do to implement caching. Now, if I give this talk to technical people, this is a whole different talk. Okay, I'm talking. This talk is primarily targeted at non-technical website owners. Okay, if you're a programmer, hey, hang out, kibitz me, to point out to everybody else when I'm wrong, but you're not going to get a lot from it because this is basically talking, we're basically focusing on non-technical people. So I'm going to tell you what you as a non-technical site owner can do to implement caching. In this session, we're going to talk about what is caching, why do we cache things, and we'll touch a little bit about does it really make a difference? And I'll also show you a couple of things to show you that it does make a difference. And I'll show you how I implement cache on my blog. Now for this session, I'm going to be using my primary website, calevans.com, which is hosted at SiteGround, as the example for everything. It's got a little bit of e-commerce, it's got a little bit of blog, there's a little bit of images. It's not a heavy duty site, but on the other hand, it's really not a lightweight site either. So what is caching? Well, at its base, when we started, caching was just there to make things faster. Okay. Back in the early days of the web, servers were really slow, and some of these more expensive operations, and you'll hear me say expensive operations a lot. When I say expensive operation, I mean calculation wise. It takes a long time to do this. And quite honestly, anything takes more than about a half second on the web is a long time. That's an expensive operation. So some of the brains behind the web sat down and said, hey, if this takes a half second to do this, why don't we take and store the results of this, and we'll just use that for a while. And then every now and then we go and we delete that and we recalculate it to refresh the cache. Now, these expensive operations can be things like SQL calls. If you're using WordPress or any modern day web platform, you've probably got a database behind it, and it's probably an SQL database or a relation database management system, RDMS. But those are beautiful for pulling data out of, but they're not always the fastest operation, especially on very complex queries. So most databases these days will cache things for us. Also, calls to outside APIs. If you are calling, my favorite example used to be Twitter, because Twitter used to be really easy to work with, but we'll use that because everybody knows what it is. But if you're calling Twitter's API to get you the last 5 tweets from your timeline so you can display them there, those don't change that much, or, maybe they change once an hour or so. So why go and talk to Twitter and wait on Twitter every time when you can just store that? Basically, any computational expensive operation is a candidate for caching. Now, not all caches are created equal. In this session, we're going to talk about caches that we can integrate into WordPress and control from WordPress. And that's really important, okay? Because there are some really good caching systems that happen outside of our sphere of influence. And we're not going to really delve deeply in this. I'm going to touch on them so that you know that they're there, but we're not going to delve deeply in them because they're not something that you as a non-technical site owner can worry about. If you get to the point where you want that kind of caching, then you're going to have to bring on a DevOps person or a programmer to help you implement that. So what are the types of caching? Well, the first type of caching is database caching, okay? I'm going to run through these, and then we're going to talk about them in a little bit, or talk about them in detail in a little bit. But if you've got a database, then chances are that database has built-in caching. We can also cache on the application side, WordPress, some of those queries as well. But for the most part, database caching is something that is transparent to you, the user. Then we have file system caching. This is where we store things like full page caches and stuff like that. And yes, the file system is the slowest part of the system, but if it takes a second to assemble all of the parts of a page, but it only takes 1/10 of a second to pull that off the file system, then it's still faster than having to regenerate that every time. Now, we used to call this hard drive, okay? But these days, most of websites, at least the top tier web hosts, are serving off of SSDs, which are basically sticks of memory that look like hard drives to the computer. So hard drive, as in the traditional, isn't the way that it used to be. So we just call this the file system these days. Then there's memory, and this is absolutely the fastest place to cache things. And at SiteGround, we use Memcached. Other top tier hosts also use Memcached, so we're going to focus on that one. There's a couple of these around, but we're going to talk about this particular Memcached. The concepts I explained, though, will be relevant to any of these key value pair stores. And then there's edge caching. And again, this is something that's outside, like database caching, it's outside of the purview of WordPress. So we don't talk a lot about it. But basically, edge caches, they call them edge because they sit on the edge of the network, whereas your server is the center of the network, and the computer, that the user viewing your website, is the edge. These edge servers or edge caching sit closer to the edge or closer to the user. And usually what happens is they'll store a large chunk of stuff that doesn't change and serve it up. You hear a lot of people talk about varnish and things like that. Those are edge caching servers. They're very powerful if you are starting to have to ramp up hardware and stuff like that just to serve the number of users you're consistently getting. Then you might want to look at something like edge caching. So let's go in deep on those. First of all, most modern database servers, and this wasn't always the case, but most of them these days will cache the results of the most common queries. They have very complex routines to figure out what the most common queries, what that means, and they will cache the results for those. So the first time you ask for a user or a blog post, then it'll say, oh, you're getting this one blog post a lot. Why don't I go ahead and store this in query cache? And the next time, instead of accessing the database, it will say, oh, I already know the answer to this one. Let me serve this one up. It gets complex because they have to figure out when to clear that cache or invalidate that cache, as programmers talk about. And it's not nearly as simple as it sounds. But again, this is something that is this is in the arena that DBAs play in, database administrators. And if you find yourself getting ready to start tuning SQL, if you are hosting on a web server where you have access to the service and the config files, and you find need to do this, then you're going to want to hire a professional to do this. I've been programming for very close to 40 years now, and most of that time has been spent working with databases, and I still hire a professional DBA when I need a cache tuned because it's just very deep and very detailed. You cannot do any of this within WordPress. It must be set up outside of WordPress. Then the file system. Now, the file system is the absolute slowest way to get stuff, okay? Databases have indexes built there, and the data is organized, and it's very quick to pull most information out. The file system, when you ask for a file, the kernel of the operating system has to go find that file and then give it back to you. And this is the most, the slowest way to get something out of the system. Still, as I said earlier, it is a good way to cache, it is a good place to put expensive caches. Like a lot of systems will cache their homepage for an unlogged in user, okay? On my website, which I'll show you in a little bit, on my website, the front page does not change if you're not logged in. It's always the exact same. So why should I rebuild that every time? Matter of fact, my front page hasn't changed in probably a year. So why should I keep rebuilding that every time? I can build it one time and store it on the file system, and then I can pull it off the file system and display it quicker than I can reassemble all the parts. This is part of what SiteGround Optimizer plugin does. There are several other good optimizer plugins out there that will do the same thing. It's called full page caching or file system caching, and it's a great alternative for large complex pages. Also, I talked to you about making API calls. A lot of times when I am doing things where I am querying Twitter's API to get the last 5 or the last 10 tweets or something like that, I will gather them. Twitter gives it to me in a format called JSON, and I'll gather them all together and I'll just store it on the file system. Because as slow as the file system is, it's faster than Twitter. So I can just read it off the file system, and then every hour, every 2 minutes, whatever you decide, you can invalidate that cache. And the invalidation, or once you do that, the system will say, oh, since this is no longer valid, I need to go get a new copy. And we'll talk a bit more about invalidating and purging caches towards the end of this. Then there's memory. Now, this is the absolute fastest place to store things, but it's also one of your most scarce resources, okay? Whereas you might have 80 gigabytes of hard disk space, you probably only have 2 or 3 gigabytes of RAM, and there's a lot running in there that's competing for that RAM. So while it is fast, we don't want to store a lot of stuff. We want to store small bits of information that are frequently accessed. For instance, if you're using WooCommerce, okay, WooCommerce stores your store's address in WooCommerce. That'd be a great thing to store in a key value pair or in a memory situation, because that's not going to change that often, and it's a small piece of information. So we use systems like memcached, which is a key value pair server. What that means is I have a value, my store's street address, and I want to store it in memory, and I give it a key, and the key is just a way to recognize this. So I call this store underscore address. So store underscore address is my key, my actual address is my value. I store that in memory, and every time I need that, instead of going to the database to retrieve it, WordPress knows, oh, I've got this over here in the key value pair. Let me pull it out. Now, I know what you're asking. Well, how does WordPress know? WordPress knows. All of these systems are built around the concept that if you have a caching plugin and you have a key value pair, then WordPress will utilize that for certain pieces of information. One of the most common pieces of things that WordPress stores in a key value pair is what we call transients. A transient in WordPress is just a piece of information that has a finite lifetime. Think of a weather forecast, okay? A weather forecast is only good for 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever. So, it's got a finite lifetime. So a transient's a piece of information that I can pull out of WordPress, but WordPress knows after this certain time not to give it to me. And my system is smart enough to know, oh, I need to go and get a new one after this. Systems like SiteGround's optimized plugin automatically load the transients as they are read into your key value pair. So you don't even have to do anything. The plugin takes care of putting all this in. If you've watched any of my webinars before with SiteGround, I'm a scuba diver. Okay. And one of the things I do, I live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and we have one of the most beautiful shore dives in the world right here in West Palm Beach, Florida, called the Blue Heron Bridge. But you have to dive it according to the tide. So you want to go in about an hour before, and you want to come out about 30, 45 minutes after. But you get a nice little hour, 2-hour dive in there if you time it right. Well, that makes tide tables very important. So I wrote a plugin for WordPress for my one of my websites that displays that information. It actually hits 4 different APIs to gather things like the phase of the moon, what time the sun rises, all of that, and aggregates that all into one place. And it shows it for 30 days. So it's not just one day, but I got 30 days. So I can look at that and say, oh, I can go diving on this day, and it's at noon, so I don't have to get up at stupid o'clock in the morning. That is all well and good, but I don't want to have to hit those APIs, those 4 different APIs, every time I want to display that page. Number one, they charge me if I go over a couple hundred hits, so I don't want to start running into bills. But number two, that gets real slow, real fast. So what I did was I go out and pull every morning, the first time somebody requests it, I go out and pull 30 days worth of information. I look at the current transients in there and say, okay, all of these are valid. Oh, that one's invalid. Let me take the current information and put it in there and drop it in. And now I never have to worry about hitting that page again until tomorrow morning, or hitting that API again until tomorrow morning. I'm caching all of these, and I'm caching them in transients. So WordPress takes care of getting rid of that data for me. I don't have to get rid of it each time. These are all, if you're not using memcached or any key value pair, these are all read out of the WP options table every time you display a page that needs that information. And SiteGround Optimize and the other optimized plugins out there automatically take care of the first time you read that information. It says, okay, I'm going to read it from the database, and I'm going to store it in the key value pair. And then every other time until it expires, it's going to read it straight out of the key value pair. Then there's the edge caching. I talked a little bit about this. We'll talk a little bit more. Varnish is by far the most common of these servers. There are services you can hire, but if you're running your own server as an edge cache, then you're probably going to be using Varnish. And one of the great things about things like Varnish is you can do partial page caching. Okay, partial page caching is I don't want to cache the whole page, but my hero graphic and the text that goes over that does not change. So I can package all of that up and ship it to all my edge caches around the world. And when it comes time to serve that to a user, the user goes through the edge cache. The edge cache says, "Oh, I've already got this," and so it sends it back a lot quicker. It doesn't have to make the whole trip back to where my server is and then back to where the user is. Sites like Netflix and Amazon make just copious use of edge caching servers. They store all of their graphics, all of their JavaScript and all that on there so that they are served much faster than if it all came out of one server or even one central data center. Okay, so how do we implement caching? Well, outside of WordPress, you've got things like Cloudflare. If you've not experimented with Cloudflare, it is a great edge cache service. Currently, SiteGround will implement that with the click of a button. So you can just turn that on. It takes a little while to get that warmed up and get it going. And you're going to have an account at Cloudflare. But that will push all of your data out to the edge, or all of your static stuff out to the edge, so that you're only serving the important parts. And when you change a blog post or you add a new post or something like that, then all of the optimizing plugins know to push it back out to the edge caches. But that's really outside of WordPress. You don't have any direct control over those caching. Then there's plugins. Boy, I'm going through this a lot faster than I thought. Hope y'all got lots of questions. Then there's plugins. Now, there are a lot of good plugins out there that implement all kinds of caching, okay? We've talked about SiteGround Optimize. There's some other good ones out there. These are very complex. And if you were to implement any of these on your own, you'd probably have to hire a professional. But systems like SiteGround's Optimize make it easy enough so that most people don't have to. And let's take a look at that. I think this is where I'm supposed to do that. Okay. First of all, if you're going to implement memcached, then you have to go into your SiteGround tools, and you go right down here to memcached, and you click that so that it's green. Okay. Once you've done that, and like I said, this is calevans.com. I come over. I've got the SiteGround Optimizer plugin installed. I click on caching, and you'll notice I've got dynamic caching, file-based caching, and memcached all turned on. Okay, I want it all ready. I've also got automatic purge, and we'll talk about purging caches in just a little bit. Those are the really important ones. The rest of these are interesting, but those are the ones that those four right there are the ones that you really want to make sure that you turn on. Okay, let's go back. Oh, that was the SiteGround Optimizer. So I was just a little bit early on that. Now, SiteGround also has on the front end, front end? Okay, you've got things like Minify for JavaScript, CSS, and the general will allow you to do some things with your HTML. Those are great ways to speed things up, but they're not technically caching. Okay, Minify just takes all the spaces out of your CSS. Combine takes all of your CSS and puts it into one big file. If you're going to do these, and you'll notice I have Minify turned on, but Combine turned off. If you're going to do these, do them one at a time, and then check it. Go visit your site. Is everything working? Does everything look okay? I usually let it settle for a day and make sure everything's fine, and then go do another one. Don't turn a lot of these things on at once. And the same goes with caching. When you're doing caching, do it once, okay? And then or make one change. See if that made a difference. So, does it make a difference? Yes, it does. First of all, before I started this talk, I went in and turned off all these caching, these 4 issues, just these 4, and I went and did a speed test for my website. Now, if you're not familiar with it, webpagetest.org is by far the best tool to be using for detailed analysis of your site. Now, I don't really need detailed analysis, but what it tells me right here is the first time it tried to view it without any caching on, it took 2.617 seconds to load my site. Now, there was a day when that was just blindingly fast. These days, that's not, okay? Anything 2 seconds or more, that's slow, okay? So, but it also gives me the film strip. It tells me, if I look right here, 1.4 seconds, if you see the little black bar, that means that at 1.4 seconds, it started seeing something, and at 2.1 seconds, most everything was loaded. But on this one, my speed index is 1.955. It's okay. It's not great, okay? But this was without any caching whatsoever. Now, I turned on all 3 of these. And originally, I was going to do this live, but when you go to Web Page Test, a lot of people are using that. And if you don't have a paid account, you just have to get in line to run it. So at one point, when I ran this second one, I was 400th in line, and so it took it about 10 minutes to actually get to me. So I've just basically just saved off all these results now. But here we've got, you see my speed index dropped to 1.5, but my time dropped to 1.91 seconds for the first one. Now, I just turned the cache on, which means that parts of it weren't yet cached. Parts of it were, but parts of it weren't yet cached, but it still made 1.91. The second time it tried to do it, I'm at 1.55 seconds. And that's because the caching had kicked in at that point, okay? Everything was cranking hard. And I cut my time from, wrong one, from 2.61 to 1.55. Okay. Now, if you measure load time in dollars like Amazon does, that's money. Okay. Just for the first runs, I went from 2.61 to 1.9. That's a 0.7 second difference. That's significant. Okay. Number one, what that means is your page loads faster. Number two, what that means is you can handle more users without having to invest in more hardware. Okay. At the same level as you're handling them now. So that's money. Okay. Amazon actually has run the calculation. They know how much per millisecond it costs them after that first second, because people get tired and they bounce. Okay. We still have that problem. If you're running an e-commerce shop, there is a number at which people just won't wait for your page to load any longer. 1.91 seconds, that's pretty fast, okay? People don't really notice that there's a delay at that point. So there are a couple of things that you have to do. And one of those is every now and then you have to purge your cache. And we've actually got a question in the questions about this. I'm going to touch on this. But you have to purge your cache. Programmers call it invalidating the cache, but the rest of us call purging. And where'd that? Yeah. If you use the SiteGround Optimize plugin, most of the plugins do something similar. But if you use it, you've got this right here. This is your button of last resort. You don't want to have to keep hitting that button, because what that does is say, I'm going to clean it all. And if you've got anything in Memcached, it pulls it out. If you've got anything on the file system, it deletes it. All of your caching goes away, and you've got to rebuild all of that. And sometimes that is slow. A better option is to make sure that this is checked. And almost all the plugins, the caching plugins, have something like that, where they have an automatic purge. And what that basically says is, if you have an e-commerce shop and you add a new product, well, automatic purge is smart enough to know that it's got to clear the cache for your product listing because now you've got a new product and that new product might have to be there. It doesn't know if that product is going to be there, but it clears the cache. The next time somebody looks at your product listing, it's going to see it there. If you change a price, automatic purging is going to say, okay, I got to clear the cache for that product, but also for the product listing, because you don't want to change the price and have it still the old price on your product page listing. If you add a new blog post to your blog, then it will clear the blog list cache. If you change the title on it, it will change all of these. That's automatic purge, and that is by far much easier. But it's only so smart. I don't care which plugin you use, it can't get all the edge cases. So if you do change a price and you start noticing that it hasn't changed on your system, then you know you've got to purge that cache. And at that point, you click this button, okay? And you click it, and it doesn't ask you, are you sure? It just says, okay, I'm going to do this. And it clears it out. Now, it also is down here, but this one survives all, or goes on all the other pages. Now, my site doesn't have any caching, and the first person that visits my site is going to start rebuilding my cache for me. Okay. And it's that rebuilding. Hang on. It's that rebuilding process that I want to talk about now, which is warming up your cache. If you do push that last that purge cache, this is my final solution type thing, I'm going to push that button and clear all of it out. Well, now you don't have any caching at all. There's a couple of solutions for that. The most common is just wait. As people visit your page, they'll rebuild the cache. If that's okay with you, then do it. There are systems out there. There's a big and very popular e-commerce system called Magento. It doesn't work on WordPress, but it's called Magento. And it is so complex that it has an entire cache warm-up system. So if you do something, it will start building page caches and stuff like that. And if they roll out a new version or they make changes to the code or something like that, they have to warm up their cache, because the cache system is so complex that it actually slows the site down if you don't. But if you're using WordPress and you're using SiteGround plugin, and your system is, and you can take the hit of an extra second or so to for your page to display, just let people visit. It's not a big deal. You can also, personally, you can visit all your most popular pages. All you have to do is bring them up in a browser. I usually use a separate browser. I keep Microsoft Edge installed just for that kind of stuff, where I want something that doesn't have a cache or has never been to this page, so I don't have any browser caching built in or anything. I just visit it in Microsoft Edge, and it will force my system to rebuild the cache for me, and that's really all it takes. If you want to get fancy, you can write a script. I live in the command line world a lot, and I've got scripts that do nothing more. There's a system out there called curl, which is basically just a browser. It acts like a browser, but it's a command line tool. I can use it to download pages. And I've got scripts that do nothing more than just hit my 10 most popular pages, and that warms up the cache for them. That's all it takes. So if I do have to purge my cache, I can run the script, and it takes care of it. Everything's a little slow for about a second, and then everything speeds back up tremendously. Or you can use a plugin, and that's what most people do. And there's one out there called Warm Cache. Now, I've never used it, but I took a look at it. It looks pretty good, and it's fairly recent. I think the last update was 2 or 3 months ago, which that's something you need to look at before installing a plugin, is how recently was it updated. Okay, if it was updated more than a year ago, I'd really be suspect. But Warm Cache is updated a couple months ago. And basically, it looks for your sitemap, and it just spiders your sitemap and visits each page behind the scenes. That's all it does. So that's going to warm the cache up for every one of your page. Now, the only problem I have with this is you really don't need to warm the cache up for every page. You need the 5, maybe 10 most popular pages. The rest of them, when people visit them, they will get warmed up. You don't have to visit every product in your system to warm the cache up if you don't want to, okay? But warm cache is a good option if you've got a large cache and you have to purge it. It'll just go through. Warm cache will also run on a regular basis, even if you don't click the purge button, and it just goes through your site, and every now and then it hits a page, and that if that cache has been invalidated or purged, then it will bring it back up to speed. Okay, so we have come to the end of our journey. Properly done, caching is one of the most important things you can do to speed your site up. Like everything on the web, yeah, you can do it yourself. If you want to roll up your sleeves and dig into it, you can do this stuff yourself, okay? There's plenty of tutorials out there. I've written a couple of them that will show you how to implement key value pair stores and show you how to implement full page caching and stuff like that. However, if you don't want to do that, I look for the plugins or hire someone. Okay. And if you're going to do all of this, I strongly recommend you use a staging server. Most top tier web hosts like SiteGround have a button that you can click that says, make a copy of my site, and let's call it staging. And the staging server is just where you try all this stuff out before you try it out in production. Now, staging servers can't just migrate data and plugins over. If you install something on a staging server and you go, hey, this works, you're going to have to redo the effort in production. But it's worth it, because if you try it out in staging and it doesn't work, well, you've not hosed your production site. So hit staging, load all the plugins you want for you that manipulate your cache, try them out, test them, make sure it works, and then you can migrate these things into production. And the final thing on any change that you make to your website, caching is important, but if you add a new plugin or something like that, visit webpagetest.org first. Don't just install the plugin. Go here first. Get your speed, get your baseline. This is what you're currently at. Then add SiteGround Optimizer or any of the other optimizer plugins or any plugin whatsoever that you want to add. And once you get it configured and everybody's happy, then visit it again. Okay. If you hit SiteGround Optimizer, I've already shown you. If you install SiteGround Optimizer, I've already shown you. It does literally speed your site up tremendously. However, if you install a new plugin and it is crunching your database real hard, but you don't know that, and you hit web page test after you install it, and you notice your site speed gone down, then you got a decision. Do you need the functionality that plugin gives you enough so that you're willing to take the hit on the speed? Because all the search engines have already told us speed is one of the SEO elements that you can control. Speed does affect your search engine placement, so you want to make sure that your web page is as fast as possible. Hey, thank you. Let me swap back over to here. I can pull this back up. Holy crap, we've got 42 questions. Okay, well, I told y'all to ask questions. So we're going to, and you can take a look at the questions and vote on them. So if there's one that you really, really want to see, then you can vote it up. Okay. Is it necessary to use additional caching plugins along with the SiteGround Optimizer? And is it helpful or hurtful? I am so glad you asked this, Steve. Is it necessary? Well, it depends on what you're doing, okay? If you want to control an edge cache like Varnish, there are plugins that you can actually install that will talk to Varnish and on the edge and add additional caching to your system. So I can't tell you if it's necessary. I can tell you that all the ones that I've played with, none of them have been hurtful, okay? As in, they have slowed my site down. The ones that I've played with have actually sped it up, although I have uninstalled all of them except SiteGround Optimizer because it gives me the best bang for the buck. But as with everything else, before I test it or before I install it, I run web page test, and then after I install it, I run web page test. And if it doesn't make a significant difference, I got to wonder if I need that or not. Okay. Okay, I'm reading all the comments, and I'm so glad that y'all have found value in this. Bud Mance, glad to see you, Bud. Bud's one of my old friends. Okay, he hangs out here. Bud is one of the gods in my world. He understands this stuff much better than I do, but he graciously comes around and hangs out at these sessions with me. So it's good to see you, Bud. Okay, is there a way to fully exclude a plugin from caching? We have, for example, a booking plugin that seems very vulnerable to caching. The only way you can exclude things like this is usually via URL. And let me pull this up. Is that? Yeah. See right here, exclude URLs from caching. Okay, if your plugin has a page, you can use that. I almost never, and I don't think SiteGround Optimizer does, but I almost never cache logged in content. Okay, most people that's admin content, admin pages. But if you have a subscription site or something where users log into your system, don't cache the internal pages. Okay, just cache the external pages. But you can exclude URLs. You can also exclude post types. So if your booking creates a specific post type, I would make sure that this is excluded. Now, these are manual operations. You just enter it. And the URL, you enter the URL, and then SiteGround Optimize will ignore it. Most of the caching systems will have something like this, okay? Stan, I hope that answered your question. Also, Peter seems to have jumped in there as well. Sherry, I have heard that it is a good practice to clear the cache between doing each plugin update. Is that true? Yes and no. It really depends on the plugin. If I'm updating Yoast SEO, which I use Yoast on every single site I have, it is the second plugin I install. The first is the SiteGround security plugin right here. I install that, and then I install Yoast. Absolutely. If I'm updating Yoast, probably, especially if it's a major upgrade, because Yoast does a lot of stuff under the in the background. If I am upgrading the plugin that handles shipping my mail to mailsender.com, I think is what I use. If I'm upgrading that plugin, no, because that doesn't control content. So it really depends. When in doubt, clear the cache. Okay. Chances are you can't hurt anything. I won't say absolutely that you can't hurt anything, but chances are you can't hurt anything by just clearing your cache. Okay. Grady, I make page updates and then often file updates throughout the day, and caching often shows the user older material. How do I set the site to clear the cache? That's this automatic purge. Look into that. Okay, if that's not doing it for you, the first thing I would do is file a very detailed ticket with SiteGround. If you're using the SiteGround Optimizer and the automatic purge is not doing it, file a ticket with them and let them know exactly what you're doing that is not clearing the cache that you think should, okay? Because they are very responsive. I know some of the team members that work on this stuff. They're good people and they want to make it better. But look into turn that on, but occasionally that's just not going to do the trick. Also, especially if you're using Gutenberg, make sure that you purge the API cache as well. Okay, Gutenberg talks to the WordPress REST API an awful lot, and if you're not clearing REST cache, then you might not be clearing everything. But finally, if you're still having a problem, push the button. Okay, thank you, Grady. Francesco, I do not use Nginx at all. I mean, for anything that I know of. So I have no idea. I wish I could help you on that. Why does it take over 24 hours for my website to update after deleting caches? Because your cache expiration times are set for 24 hours. If you are using a plugin like SiteGround Optimizer, you can't change that. But on the other hand, it won't. It will clear them for you automatically, or you can purge it. Most of the time, when I see long times like that, it's because you're using edge case or edge caching like Cloudflare or Varnish. And in those cases, you can, in Cloudflare, you can go out and tell Cloudflare, purge all my caches, and it purges it everywhere. Okay. This is a huge deal. This is going to slow you down, especially if you're big enough to use Cloudflare, then it's going to slow you down for a few minutes while it rebuilds all that cache. But that's what that means. If you're not using FG Optimize and you're not using Cloudflare and you're still having this problem, then either there's an option to change how long it will cache the default for caching content, or you're going to have to bring in a programmer. Okay. Why are page speed results so different on desktop versus mobile? I got no idea other than processor speed, okay? Because 5G these days is blindingly fast. In fact, 5G is faster than my original home connections to the internet were. So we've got fast connections, everything, but we do have a little bit slower processors. And a lot of times it's got to squeeze data and squeeze pictures and stuff like that. So I have no real answer to that other than it just is. Webpagetest.org. Leave that up there because this is real important, people. This gives you the option to tell it how you want to cache. Let's look at it. I'm sorry. This gives you the option on how you want to test. Okay. So if I put in Levins.com, the default is mobile on 4G out of Virginia. Okay. I normally test desktop cable Virginia. Virginia is far enough from me so that it's not, I'm not hitting my service provider's local edge cache and stuff like that. It's having to go out there and get it. And this is actually, they've got a server in Virginia, server farm in Virginia, and they run it as a process. And they've got a headless browser that will go visit your page and download everything and print it all out. And that's what they do. But if you want to see mobile, you can see mobile. You can change any of these. Okay. I can, I forget how you, they just recently changed them, change how you do it. Oh, advanced configuration. Okay. So I can tell it, I don't want Chrome. I want Firefox. I can tell it, I don't want cable. I want 4G, whatever you want. And you want to hit the most common scenarios for your customers. Okay. Let's get back to, I don't want anybody to say, well, Cal, you didn't give me the URL. So, okay. If I use the purge cache from my WordPress admin page, do I still need to go to the SiteGround page and purge from there as well? No. Okay. That makes if you're hosting with SiteGround, the purge cache tool or purge cache button on your website tools does the exact same thing as the purge cache button up on the admin bar in WordPress. Okay. It makes a call to SiteGround's internal API, and that does the deed. Did I stop audio? No, I did not. I have not, as far as I know, I have not stopped audio. Okay. Is there an easy way to test and confirm that SiteGround's Memcached is working on a WordPress site? How about non-WordPress sites? Easy, no. First of all, non-WordPress sites like Drupal, they are fully supported on SiteGround, but you have to wire everything up yourself. When I need to test that this stuff is actually working, I usually write some code. Okay. There might be plugins to do it. I've not investigated that much, but I can usually hammer out about 10 lines of code that will show me what is in Memcached. That's all I care about, because if I see data in there, then I know it's working. So, but off the top of my head, other than writing code, I don't know any good way to tell. I will say that I've been hosting with SiteGround for 2 or 3 years. And since I turned on Memcached, I've never had it not working when I tested it out. So Once basically if you've turned it on, it's working. If you're using Drupal or something like that, SiteGround will give you the URL and the login and password for your memcached server, and you'll have to go into Drupal or any of the Joomla, any of the other systems, and put in their memcached plugin and put that information in there. Once that's working, everybody's hunky-dory. Can you briefly explain the optimal SiteGround Cloudflare cache settings? No, and that's only because I don't use Cloudflare. I'm sorry. It's a good system. I'm not anti-Cloudflare. It's just that none of the sites that I am using are busy enough to make it make a difference. Susan. Oh, that's this one. I'm glad you asked this, Susan. The question is, my site's cache has to be cleared manually pretty consistently or it won't load. This is frustrating to have to go in every week or so and clear the cache. This is a regular HTML site, not a WordPress site. Any suggestions? Yes, I have a great suggestion. Go to your local WordPress meetup or your local computer user group meetup. Find somebody that can take a look at it for you. With the amount of information you've given me there, I really can't debug it. Obviously, you do have a problem. Most times, if you find somebody, like I've actually helped people do stuff like this for the price of a decent bottle of rum. Okay. And that might, decent bottle of rum these days is $50. But I'm putting in 2 hours, 2.5 hours trying to debug your system. And you don't want to know what my hourly rate is, but it's not $50 for 3 hours. So if you can find a professional that will just go in and help you with that, something like that, I highly recommend that. Programmers work for for M&Ms. I prefer peanut M&Ms. M&Ms, pizza, beer. I prefer rum, Black Rifle coffee, any of those kind of things. They can usually for these small little things. Don't be surprised if they look at it and say, you got a major problem. You're going to need to hire a professional to actually fix this problem. But if it's just a configuration setting or something like that, yeah, you can usually get somebody to help you out. Brett, I'm gonna go off book here. Brett just asked, how do we reduce initial server response time? That's called time to first byte. And if I ever figure out how to reduce that on a regular basis, I will let you know. But some sites I don't have a problem with it. Other sites I do. It's not the sites that I have on SiteGround don't have a problem with it, and the sites I host with my personal server do, or vice versa. It's just sometimes I see it jump, other times I don't. A lot of that has to do with your DNS hosting. Okay, if your DNS is hosted with SiteGround and your server is hosted to SiteGround, then SiteGround doesn't have to go far to find your DNS information. They can pull it up quickly and start serving it faster. So when I'm looking at TTB problems, that's the first place I look at is the place that I'm hosting my DNS causing me problems. Okay. Next question. I still get static or serve static assets with efficient caching policy alerts on Lighthouse. Okay, in that case, that's beyond the basics that most any plugin are going to do. They're looking for, Lighthouse is looking for headers that give it clues on how to serve this particular one or how to pull that particular one from static cache. And there are a couple of paid plugins that you can get. They're not cheap, but they will help you do those. I do not recommend you trying to go it alone on this one and say, hey, I know how to set a header. I'm just going to do this. These are very complex headers that you're going to, if you get them wrong, you could really mess things up. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Let's see. I have a WordPress photography site with heavy image use, and it loads a lot of data up front. Any tips for faster loading of code resources? Code resources. If you're hosting with SiteGround, then there's absolutely nothing you can do because they've already got what we call APC, the alternative PHP cache, which is no longer the alternative, but that's just the name stuck since PHP 4. But APC compiles your code into bytecode and stores it into RAM. That's the absolute fastest way to do that. And SiteGround's already got that turned on for you. You can't even turn it off. Okay, so no, there's nothing you can do to speed up code resources. For your images and stuff like that, I hope you, if you've got a busy site, that'd be a great example of a site that could benefit from edge caching like Cloudflare. So we don't want to use the purge cache whenever we want to make a change. I thought it helped for website changes to show up sooner. Greg, that really depends, okay? If you've got everything set up properly and SG Optimizer is doing its job on the automatic purge thing, then hitting the purge is just, that's just going to clear everything, okay? Given our current political situation, I'm hesitant to use this term, so please forgive me, but it's what we call the nuclear option, okay? That's just going to get rid of everything. And that's not really what you want. You don't want to get rid of everything. You want to get rid of this one piece of cached information. And that's what automatic purge does for us, okay? If automatic purge is not doing that for you, then the number one thing I would do is go out to SiteGround, open a ticket, and let the team know what you're trying to do that is not purging its cache. Because if you do that, chances are good that they can solve that problem if it's something that should be caching. Okay. Okay, one more question. Okay, Vinod, I'm going to kind of answer your question. Vinod says, I have a question about caching when I use the plugin All-in-One WP Security. I used to use that plugin. Whenever I use that plugin, I see that my pages need to be cached very frequently. Yes, and this is where WordPress gets really interesting, okay? And this is why I tell you to test before you install a plugin, and then after you have installed and configured that plugin, retest. Because some WordPress plugins don't play nice with other WordPress plugins. And it's not like the authors of this plugins are at war and they say, hey, I see that you've got this one plugged, or you've got this one installed, so I'm going to screw you on that. No, they're all trying to focus on the one thing that they do well. But sometimes the combination of things that they do well isn't good for our site. So I can't answer your question about all-in-one WP security other than I like them. I used to use them. But I can tell you that you should be testing that before you install it and then after you install it. And if you're getting a degradation in your site because you installed a plugin, then you as the site owner have to decide, do I really need this, or is there a better option that I can choose? Hey, we are all out of time. Thank you so much. Y'all have been a wonderful audience. I really wish I could hear y'all, but I can't hear y'all. Thank you so much. I hope that y'all come back. Okay, I do one of these every month for SiteGround. I appreciate y'all showing up. It's always fun to talk to y'all. And from my secret lair here in South Florida, I'm signing off and throwing it back over to SiteGround.
Thank you so much for this awesome presentation and for shedding some light on this dark matter called caching. Thanks to all live viewers and participants who contributed by sharing their knowledge in the chat and the Q&A section. We will email you a link to the webinar recording tomorrow, and you can also rewatch the video on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe by clicking the button. That's all from us for today, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar. Goodbye and stay safe.